All right, today we're talking about something that's all around you, but you probably never even think about it. They're the invisible rules that keep us safe in our own homes. We're diving into the story of building codes.
So let me ask you something. What could possibly connect a huge disaster like the Great Chicago Fire, the crowded slums of the 1800s, and the simple fact that the floor you're standing on right now is safe?
You guessed it, it all comes down to a set of rules born from disaster. See, building codes aren't just some boring technical documents. No, they're literally lessons learned from the worst things imaginable, written down to make sure we don't repeat the past.
So let's dive right in at the beginning. Section 1, Born from Tragedy. We're going to look at how fire, disease, and total disaster actually created the very first rules for how we build.
You know, the idea that builders should be held accountable? It's ancient. We're talking way back, 1750 BC, when Hammurabi's code said if your building fell down and killed someone, well, you could be put to death for it. Fast forward a few thousand years to colonial Boston, where the big fear was fire, so they banned wooden chimneys and thatched roofs. Then by the 1850s, the enemy was disease, which is why cities like New York started making plumbing a requirement.
And I mean, you can see the difference, right? Cities went from these dark, crowded, unsanitary streets that were just perfect breeding grounds for sickness to these wider, brighter spaces that let in light and air. And this wasn't just about making things look prettier. No, this was a full-on public health revolution, all driven by new rules for building.
But here's the thing you got to remember about this early era. All of these codes were a reaction. There was no master plan. It was just a messy, inconsistent patchwork of local rules that were usually passed after something terrible happened. And a lot of the time, people just ignored them anyway.
Which brings us to Section 2, a patchwork of rules. So how do we get from that total chaos to, well, something that makes a little more sense? That messy journey really gets going in the 20th century. By the 1940s, the system was a total mess. You didn't have one set of rules. You had three major competing groups. One for the West, one for the Northeast, and one for the South. Just try to put yourself in the shoes of an architect back then. Building in different parts of the country was a nightmare of confusion, wasted time, and ballooning costs.
So finally, people said, okay, enough is enough. Things started to change in '72 when the groups got together to talk. But the real game changer came in 1994 with the creation of the International Code Council, the ICC. Their whole mission was to create one unified set of codes for everyone. And by 2000, they did it. The first big one was the International Residential Code. And just like that, by 2002, that old broken system was gone.
So what does this new, modern system actually look like? How do these rules even get written today? That's what we're digging into in Section 3. Let's pull back the curtain on creating the model code.
Okay, first we need to get one thing straight. A model code isn't actually a law. Think of it like a template, a set of minimum standards put together by experts. It's just a suggestion, really, until a state or your local city council officially adopts it and says, yep, this is the law here now.
Now, what's really wild is how this all happens. Every 3 years, the ICC has this big process, and it's surprisingly open. And I mean, anyone, you, me, a builder, a product maker, can submit an idea to change the code. Then, those ideas get debated out in the open, in public hearings. But the final decision? That comes down to a vote by government members, who are mostly the local officials that actually have to enforce these rules every day.
So on paper, you've got this great democratic process that's supposed to get everyone to agree. But in the real world, it's turned into an absolute battleground.
And that leads us right into the heart of the conflict. Section 4, the Great Code Debate. Are these rules essential for our protection, or are they just a huge, costly burden?
On one side, you have the people focused on cost, and they'll point to a number like this one. A 2022 survey said that recent code changes alone tack on an extra 11% to the cost of a new apartment. Their argument? This is making the housing crisis worse. Period.
But then you have the other side, right? And they come back with their own powerful number. A big national study found that for every single dollar we spend building to these modern, disaster-resilient codes, we as a country save $11 down the line by avoiding damage and loss.
So you see the two camps, right? On one hand, it's about essential protection.
Saving lives, lowering your energy bills, creating more resilient communities. But then the other side says, hold on, these codes are a huge burden. They drive up housing costs, the process is painfully slow, and special interests can game the system to get their own products required by law.
And this critique from the Cato Institute kind of gets to the why behind this whole fight. They argue the ICC process fails to elevate technical analysis. Its weak requirements for cost analysis pave the way for rhetoric rather than reason to drive code changes. Basically, they're saying it's too easy for someone to push for a change by just saying it's for safety, without having to show hard proof that the benefits are actually worth the price tag.
So, with all this back and forth, where does that leave us? Well, it brings us to our final big idea in Section 5. This is an evolving blueprint, because if there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's that this rulebook is never ever finished.
There's this quote I absolutely love. It's from way back in 1927 from one of the very first model codes, and it just says, "The code is not and never will be perfect." I mean, think about that. They knew from the very beginning that this was always going to be a work in progress,
And if you look at what's coming, wow, the challenges are just getting bigger and more complicated. We're talking about climate change and how to build for more extreme weather. We're talking about new technology like smart home features and brand new materials. And of course, there's that constant balancing act between affordability and safety and the big push for more energy efficiency.
So it really all comes down to this, doesn't it? Building codes started out as a reaction, looking backward at tragedies we'd already suffered. But now, as we're staring down these huge future challenges, from climate resilience to housing affordability, the real question for all of us is, what do we want this evolving blueprint for our world to become?